Welcome everyone to yet another episode of The Color Authority. Today I'm going to be talking to Anja Gaede, the founder of SPOTT. SPOTT Trends in Business provides Scandinavian lifestyle brands with consumer insight, trends and color forecasts for spot-on business development. Now Anja has a MA degree in communication and is specialized in fashion, consumerism and experience economy. Besides numerous presentations, product development cases, strategy sessions, and consultations over the past 14 years, she's also published a Danish book. I'm going to translate it for you in English, Customer Chemistry, the Experience Economy in Retail, and has also edited the anthology Fashion Film and Transmedia. Welcome to the Color Authority. Anja, I'm so happy you are here. How are you?
Thank you very much, Judith. It's a pleasure to be here. I am fine under all the circumstances, just getting used to all the changes that's happening.
Where are you currently? You're at home in Denmark?
I am actually at my office in Denmark, yes. I still have the ability to be able to go to my office as we're not that many people and we can be very distant from each other. So I still have the pleasure of biking from my home to my office. But of course, I've spent many days at home as well.
Biking to your work, it sounds very much like my Dutch upbringing. Yeah, something that we don't really tend to do here in Italy because of safety, I guess. But it sounds very similar to how we go to work, obviously, when I was still living in the Netherlands a few years back. Sounds very romantic to most people, I think.
Yeah, well, the distances are smaller here, particularly in Denmark as compared to other Scandinavian countries. So it's a very chosen way of going via bike, not only just to be environmentally, but it's also easier actually. And safety has been a priority also for the infrastructure in the smaller cities, but also in the bigger cities for creating some good conditions for bikers. So
very healthy lifestyle. So Anja, you are indeed born and raised in Denmark and you work with a lot of Scandinavian brands. How would you say indeed that Denmark or even Scandinavia is different from other parts in Europe? Just generally, you just hit on the word sustainability, but just in generally also when we talk obviously about, interior design and fashion brands that you mainly work with, how do you see that difference between North and South?
Yeah, of course, if we look at the macro view of things from a societal point of view, climate, culture, and definitely our welfare model creates a different fundament when you are talking the difference between North and South. So we do have a system and a culture that is, of course, dependent on the colder climate. For once, that means also a little bit more invert culture that links to, of course, interiors in the home. As a home is a place where we are to a large extent at the time and not has that big of an outgoing culture, for example, as we see much more in the South, where the gatherings are also more outside. So the gatherings are more homey centered. And that has been, of course, particularly strengthened through the last part of the time. So the climate, of course, defines how the differences come out. And then the culture, where we're also seeing that we are having a culture that is built very much on our welfare model, as I mentioned. The welfare model is very linked to a society where equality is high in both terms, linked to gender, but also linked to how welfare we are. We have a big taxation system that makes sure that the social side of the society is kept well. And that brings down that and making a more equal society. And that also has a link to what kinds of abilities, financial abilities, does the general public have, because we have a safety net underneath us. So the general population have also the ability to create a home. It's also a less dense and urbanized country that we live in, as compared also just to south of the border, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and England, of course. So we are a smaller population with smaller distances. Like it takes only like 3.5 hours to go from north to south in Denmark and from west to east. So it is a small country. We're less urbanized and living out there with larger square meters, for example, also if you have a reference to interiors.
How do you think that all this, the background in culture, but also the climate, especially your take on sustainability, which I do think is a lot different from some other countries in Europe. How does that reflect indeed to the brands that you work with? How do you see that back in maybe materials or textures being used, but even color? How do you see that as different for the Nordics as to other parts in Europe?
Well, we have a more muted and also a less bright color usage and color culture. So we're very much fond of colors that is very like off-key is what I call them. So they're a little bit difficult to define. Actually, they have a tonality that goes in many directions and not as bright and colorful as we see, for example, in the South. So we very much like the tonal, the grays, the neutrals, something that is not as much in your face. And that's also very much a cultural thing that we have going on here in our world. So it's really that Nordic and the nature inspiration comes into as well, that they are very naturalistic colors that we are also very fond of. We get inspired by the tones in our and surrounded of our nature. That goes from the very hilly and mountain sides that we have in both Norway and Sweden to also the more foresty and more flat and greens and earthy neutrals that we have here in Denmark. So very much more neutral and not as bright as I can see in other parts of Europe.
Indeed, when I look into some trend forecasts, for example, or even when we talk about trends within Color Marketing Group, very often people from all around the globe, they refer to the colors from the north, indeed, like Scandinavian influence or Scandi colors, indeed, because they are very popular. Not everybody is always looking to, for example, Paris or London or maybe Milan. They are looking, I believe, ever more to also what is happening trend-wise and color-wise also in Scandinavia. Am I correct to believe that?
Yeah, that's also what I hear. You know, people are interested in seeing what comes from the Scandinavian way. And maybe also it's because it looks, for some parts and some cultures and some countries, it looks very different because it is less bright and it's more neutral and it's more tonal and more low-key in its direction.
You see that more than indeed from interior brands that have requests for, let's say, more the Scandinavian lifestyle than in fashion, for example?
Well, fashion is taking up pace. Copenhagen Fashion Week is really, really to become one of the, not top 5, but becoming a good source to look for. And the brands are being looked for there. And we do have some great cases, both with Garni or Cecilia Benson, who are becoming very much interior or internationally renowned. So it's taking up pace also to look for the Scandinavian style. But the same goes for the colors. It is much more muted in also in fashion.
Anja, you're a woman of so many facets. When I read your bio, I read this word and I was immediately triggered by it. And it's the word customer chemistry. Could you explain the audience a little bit what you exactly mean by that?
Yeah, well, we have to go a little bit back to my background of where I've began my journey to become what I is today, or what I am today. So I've always been interested in consumer behavior. I've always been a little bit of an anthropologist, even though I'm not educated within that. But I've always been super fascinated by behavior that was just observative, that you could just look at. So looking at people on the street has always been something that I've done. Like a designer maybe have been drawing their whole life. So I've been looking at people since I was a young girl. So I was fascinated by this, and I was really fascinated about understanding why we do what we do. Like, what is determining that? What is making us make the decisions that we do, or being drawn to some things and not drawn to other things? So I really dug deep into that through my education. So customer chemistry is actually my thesis when I studied at the University of Aalborg, where I looked into how chemistry is actually affecting our buying behavior as consumers. And that went into a published book that was called Customer Chemistry, about experience economy in retail. So my approach to this whole understanding of consumer behavior and the link to trends and what it is that we choose comes from a chemistry level. So I work with understanding the neurophysiology in us, like what is the hormones or the enzymes that makes us doing some kind of behavior. And my belief is that all of those things are due to chemistry within our body. even though we really want to say that we have very rational mindset and we make our own choices, we also do that, but it's caused to changes in our chemistry.
So that's very interesting. So you would say that, for example, I walk into a shop and I see something, and although I need it or not, I'm conscious or unconscious in most cases, I am attracted to a certain design, a certain color, because of apparently a chemistry that is already within my physical being.
Yes, so that is what will be your emotional preferences, as you call it, kind of a component of your upbringing, of your genes and your culture that is defining what you'll be attracted to and what you won't be attracted to. And that is linked to your emotions, and emotions are based in chemistry changes. Like if you taste chocolate, for example, if you like chocolate, well, then there happens a chemistry reaction in your brain, giving your reward system comes up, it releases dopamine saying, hey, I like this, that was a good experience. And it's the same and the similar thing when you go into lifestyle products, whether it's fashion or interiors, you're drawn to a certain aesthetics or colors or shape or material because you have an emotional preference for it. And that's what people are just generally saying, that's my taste or that's your taste, and that's how people differ. But you can actually link it back to that it's kind of a boxed within an area of your emotional preferences, and they have a certain aesthetic to it.
So SPOTT Trends, which is your company, focuses indeed on that very combination of, let's call it neuroscience, trend forecasting, and then the whole commercial experience of indeed walking into a shop or of any kind into indeed tangible business cases. How does this process come about when you work with a client of yours?
Yeah, it of course depends on how deep the client wants to go in this understanding. So it's from the very top level of just getting inspiration that I have pre-hand selected or put into these little boxes of different emotional preferences, as I talked about previously. And then it goes to the very deep level where I work closely with a client about defining and analyzing their customers' emotional preferences, going about getting the raw data, getting insights to what their customers are actually preferring, and then working back towards product development or guiding them through which trends it is that they want to work with. So it's on very different levels. So I work on it on a theoretical level where I guide my clients saying, hey, this trend is for you because you theoretically have this kind of custom base, to the very deep dive for the individual customer, really analyzing their specific clients through customer analysis that takes on different directions. It can both be getting really additional raw data through biometrics, but it can also be on a more higher level of just surveys and interviews and questionnaires that we are looking into. So on different levels, but it's always coming back to my core of navigating the trends, because for me, it's not just about spotting the new trends. That is not something that is difficult today. So the art is not to spot the trends, but it's actually to navigate them to the individual brand or collection or company to say which trends is business viable for you and which are not. And my basis for doing that is then this methodology about segmentating people accordingly, or consumers accordingly, to their emotional preferences. In that way, then I can say this trend is for your customers because they have this emotional preference segment.
I think it sounds like really the future, because we are combining something that is of emotions, and emotions have always been very hard to target because they are so individual, but then also to personalize experiences within the commercial world or within the retail world. And also then, of course, the product, because knowing how people feel, what they prefer, you can almost completely personalize the final product. Is that a little bit where we are going in the future?
Yeah, but you would have to go a little bit further into the future than just maybe 5 to 10 years. Where we have the technology right now is that it is getting more and more mature to be able to do actual field research where you're getting those emotional responses or the emotional raw data. And that is just maturing as we speak right now. Otherwise, beforehand, it's been lab work where you're taking people out of the real context that they're in, and then hence have a bias for that. But the technology is becoming much more mature and much more usable in the real field, like say within a retail store or in the street, or in regards to also digital environments where you can actually measure people more truly and unbiased. But we're not there yet, but it would definitely be. But it also comes, of course, with some ethics considerations to do this.
Yeah, and that obviously this is where it gets a little bit trickier, of course, in Europe. Probably less tricky in other parts of the world, but a little bit trickier with the GDPR that we have in Europe instated.
Yeah. But my approach to it also kind of have a sustainability approach to it, because what I'm saying is also, if you're not necessarily just going by the next trend without having any considerations, if this is even a product that is sellable for your customers, then you're also, overproducing or misproducing or making errors that's also both costly, but also costly on an environmental impact. So the more precise you can be about what kind of products your customer would want, and not changing them just for the sake of changing them, for example, but actually giving them maybe the same if that's their emotional preference. So it's about becoming much more to the point with the products that you're making, and having a closer match between trends and consumers.
So Anja, you and I, we go back a couple of years right now, I think, and we've very often in our trend work, we've talked about sustainability. Now, you indeed find that obviously, like many others, a very important topic, and it's a must-have for so many brands. You started off with fashion, and you started also in interior design, but now you're expanding a little bit. You're expanding also to retail. You're working with media companies, but even with cities for their city developments. Do you think that the whole topic of sustainability, but maybe also other trends, are indeed cross-industry? Or do you see maybe some interesting alterations between these very different segments?
Yeah, there is definitely crossovers and different pace of the different branches or industries and how they work with, for example, sustainability, but it can also be digitalization. So there is definitely crossover, and I guess sustainability now is a paradigm that's kind of what we're going to describe also the 10 decade with. That was when that journey began in the transformation that we are looking to really implement in the 20s. And that's how I look at it. We became smarter in the 10s, and now we're beginning to really implement it in the 20s to actually create that transformation that is needed. So I definitely see crossover in that, and that sustainability is bridging itself as a massive paradigm that is influencing all of the lifestyle sector.
Any other trends that you see that, so beyond sustainability, obviously is more like a mega trend. I mean, it's definitely here to stay. But do you see any other trends that are important in across industries? So something that maybe you've seen started in fashion and that has moved to interiors, and that now you see that's actually expanding?
I don't know if it's the other way around, but I would say digitalization is something that I've seen in different alterations and also in different tempi across the lifestyle chain. Actually, where it was the opposite, where fashion has actually been quite slow and quite conservative not to take up digitalization throughout the value chain, but they're just picking up pace now. And we saw that needed a corona for actually to happen, and to be able to use those potentials that lie within the digitalization trend and also for the value chain. So a little bit opposite is the example that I maybe have for that.
Yeah, it's true that a lot of people in my previous podcast as well talked about the influence of fashion and how fashion has this influence on, of course, also the colors and the trends. So here you are actually seeing an inverse trend. So you see that fashion is coming late to digitalization. But do you think that fashion is still at the forefront of color trends, for example?
Yeah, I definitely still think that the pace that fashion is working with and the value chain that is defining how the fashion system is working is definitely taking up the color trends in a faster pace. And that also has to do with the product of fashion, because interiors are per se more slow products. We don't change them that quickly and necessarily that quickly as we do with fashion. So the fashion cycle in itself is is faster to take up new things because it can easily be changed. But I also think that when we're seeing the way that we're approaching sustainability, we see that it depends on like materials versus the visual thing, where I think fashion is in the forefront visually with the colors, whereas I see developments in materials being a little bit more forefront there, with actual development and research, where fashion is not moving that forefront on that. It's more on the aesthetical side. They have shown expressions on how we can actually maybe reuse a lot of the materials that we have, but we're not necessarily really developing core new materials. I mean, we go organic maybe as a direction for that, but I see in interiors and materials that we're actually really developing from scratch again and seeing new and more circular elements, where the circular part in fashion is just more about closing the loop with the existing garments and textiles that we have.
Could you mention a little bit what type of new materials made from scratch that you're currently seeing as emerging in the market?
Well, we have the whole fungi environment that we're seeing with that. We're seeing like a bioiridescent sequence. Also, we're seeing iridescent wood come about as lab inventory. We're seeing material boards made out of eel grass, for example. We're seeing hemp as a material that has to be mechanically extracted and not chemically, because we've had hemp for some years, but that has been chemically treated. But mechanically extracted hemp, for example, has proven to become a very good interior textile. And that hemp, of course, is a plant that can go into volatile climate circumstances, but still thrive. So there are many directions where we're really developing from the lab into new materials that also proven to also be more scalable and also be more doable for actually the more mainstream markets.
That's very interesting. You see this mix thus of organic, but then still produced in a lab, because it seems that the materials that you're talking about, they're natural materials, but they are still created in the lab. And I think that's super interesting. Where do you go for trend scouting when you research your trends? When you go about for, what you think is going to happen in the future? What are your places online, I guess, in this moment, because we cannot really go out and about? And then maybe, some places that you love to go when we are ready to travel again, where you find your color inspiration, your trend inspiration.
Yeah, well, Judith, if you can keep it secret, I haven't actually been a trend researcher who traveled to a great large extent before. Due to that, I had kids also in the past 10 years. My boys are 9. So I didn't really travel that much. So for me, it's a little bit more on how I do it than where I go to it. I think my approach to it, because I have my methodology that I lens all of my insights through, and that gives me a special point of how I come about my trends. So it's much more on how I do it than where I go for inspiration. Of course, I have traveled to some of the same fairs and stuff, but I think it's more the processing of all of those insights, because everyone can get that insight today. It's just about developing an algorithm and then pulling it through there and digitalizing it. So it's not that seclusive or exotic. It's more about what you do with your data. And then I've also used very much the network. And then I also have a how-to that is also very important to me, that is a curiosity and the unknown. If like curiosity for the unknown, like what do I don't know anything about? And then I go follow that track and see what comes up there. And sometimes that's where, you find the things that you don't necessarily would have found yourself, also because you won't have an emotional preference for liking it yourself. So really the unknown and also what I don't like myself is very crucial in my research to find, because that's also where some of the interesting new things or trends come about.
We both work in a similar field. So indeed, as soon as you get uncomfortable in your research or with a topic, because either you don't know a lot about it or because it's not necessarily of your interest, you need that curiosity. And I think that is what makes people a good trend watcher. And most people then walk away. And I think that's where people like you and I, we dive in.
Yeah, exactly. And also because I have to serve very different clients, and some trend researchers, have an impeccable, beautiful taste and can create something that is both aligned with what they like themselves, and it's really, really beautiful. But it also limits them to a certain genre or a certain direction, where I, as an independent, also need to be broad, in my trend research, serving both the commercially and also the little bit more avant-garde-ish. So that also helps me in having a broader client portfolio.
That's an interesting point that you just mentioned, because in the end, a lot of people think that we as color designers, we tend to pick colors that we personally like. That will also mean that if we don't really change as human beings, we tend to always like the same colors. And that's something that's very key to people that want to work in this field, I think, is that not about what you personally like and what you prefer, but it's something that is about that is coming because you did the research, because you know that color is, for example, moving with all the societal changes that we are seeing. That's very key. That's an interesting thing that you just said.
Definitely. It is. A lot of times I work out design concepts or, suggest products for clients that I had no intention of buying myself. And I know that it's right then if I can see that then it would be right for their customers, because their customers is different than I am. So it's a daily routine, because it's so inherent in you to follow your own preferences, because it's uncomfortable not to. So that is is something that you can only do by experience throughout several years, I would say.
I read that you are now also a lecturer at the Fashion Experience in Aarhus. Can you explain a little bit what this project is about and how this also relates back to color?
Yeah, so the Fashion Experience is an interesting triangular project for me, because it sums together some of the approaches and the competences I have. So I'm educated within communication, and I specialized within lifestyle, interior, fashion, and then understanding an audience as well. And the Fashion Experience works with fashion film and transmedia. So it's about, communicating fashion through those both new and also well-known medias, as film is, and then transmedia as the new approach to media. So I am the responsible for having this semester of young students coming to study here in Aarhus in Denmark from various professions. Some are working very closely to film, and some are working more closely to fashion. It can be a fashion designer who is more keen on communicating or being creative within the filmic universe. So it brings together fashion and film, and in that match is communicating and marketing, and how can we take this new genre as fashion film is, and it's yet to be defined actually, and that's what we were actually working on, trying to define what is actually a fashion film. And then, of course, these students, if they're not in the fashion and they come more from film, they definitely need to learn about what is fashion for a size, what size is fashion, like what is important when you're communicating fashion on a living medium digitally in a film. And that is, of course, comes also back to color. If they put like a pink light above everything within this film and saying that's a creative filmic tool, well, then I'm saying, well, if it's a film that is having, in a marketing perspective, then it's important that we can see the colors of the fashion if we actually want a person to be able to buy from this, and not thinking that it's a pink sweater, but actually a blue sweater. Yeah. So we work with color in that sense, that when they bring in the filmic tools, they have to understand that fashion is, in its DNA, is color, and color needs to be as accurate as possible.
That sounds like a very big, but also a very nice challenge. So different from what you've been doing before. Of course, it is still fashion, but to be able to work with these young talents, that must be super exciting. So I guess it's also a give and take, right? So you obviously teach them and you guide them, but in the end, you get so much input from these brains that are novel and that are still serving.
Exactly. And how they approach things and how they see the genre, what it is that they do with it, how they're also different educational background, what they bring to table there is super interesting and gives so many insights, both to cultures and professions and everything. So it's super giving. Yes.
So this is a project that you're still working on, but is there maybe any other current project or future project that you're super passionate about that you want to share a little bit, or maybe unveil a little bit of information about what's coming for you next?
I'm passionate definitely about applying more neuroscience to trend and consumer research, and applying that even more in the commercial world. The commercial world is not quite ready for it yet, but that is definitely a track that I am following very closely in giving those more qualified data to making decisions within the lifestyle sector. Also because I think, as I mentioned before, it would help us create a more balanced consumption and a more accurate between trend and consumers. But then I'm also very fond of regenerative materials, something that we also touched a little bit on, as regenerative approach is the next thing after sustainability, because the regenerative approach is not only going with zero impact on the environment, but actually giving back to the environment. And I think that's what I'm going to track definitely for the next 10 years of how is the regenerative materials developing. Yeah, and then of course, what is going on with consumption and people and consumers post-pandemic? That is definitely also something that I highlighted. I did some scenarios already in March 20, and I'm tracking those scenarios to see if they follow suit. And it's really interesting to see that some of them are quite accurate and some of them need, of course, to be tweaked a little bit depending on what the development is doing. And that thing between are people just becoming hedonistic again, going completely crazy, or will they be minimalistic and becoming very much considered and much more sustainably orientated, or where will things go in this post-pandemic world we are heading towards?
I think there's probably going to be a little bit of duality.
Yeah, there's definitely not going to be one type of consumer, not at all. Our emotional preferences, crisis or not, are hardwired in us. So we're still going to follow them. It's just going to be in new ways. So it's definitely going to be a combination of 4 to 6 consumer types that we're talking about. We're not going to all go in one direction.
Well, I personally can't wait to see your work presented once you're ready. I really want to thank you for your talk today, all the information that you've given. It's been super interesting. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you very much for having me, that you were interested in talking with me. So thank you very much.